is to be a scientist.
My dream is to be a teacher, a plane pilot.
My dream is to be a doctor.
And that, for them, is why we are here today. We must fulfill our promise to ensure quality education for all by 2030. And to do that, we need to start with those furthest left behind, those children and adolescents caught up in crises around the world. Excellencies, distinguished guests, dear colleagues, welcome to all of you here in Geneva, and to the over 2,000 participants who have joined us online. From around the world, here for this Education Cannot Wait first ever high-level financing crisis. And I am proud to announce that HLFC will be translated in French, in Spanish, and Arabic, as well as International Sign Language here in the CICG, and live captioning in English for both the physical and the online audience. My name is Melissa Fleming, as you've seen on the screen, and I am the UN Undersecretary General for Global Communications. It is such an honor to be here with you today because education is empowerment, and empowering children living in emergencies and crises is a cause close to my own heart. As many of you know, I worked for UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, for 10 years, and part of my job was to communicate the plight of refugees. I visited so many refugee camps, and I was thinking of one as I was getting ready today in a dusty Bekaa Valley refugee camp. I met a young boy named Hani, and Hani, I asked him, as I asked many refugees, what did you take when you fled the bombing in Syria? And he got up and he went back into another room, and he came back with a silk-covered document. And he lifted that silk and looked at and showed me what it was. And he said, and it was his high school diploma. And he said, I took my high school diploma because my life depended on it. Without education, I am nothing. He then looked at his little brother who was in the camp, and he said, could you please ensure that there is education for him in this school? And so many children I met in protracted situations, a 14-year-old little girl in Djibouti, when I asked her, she was in her school and very happy, but then her eyes turned dark when I asked her, what are her plans? And she said, my education is over. And I said, why? And she said, there's no secondary education in this camp. And I just thought at that moment, this is so short-sighted. All that was missing, my colleagues told me, was funding and money. So that is why it's so essential we're here today to support Education Cannot Wait. Around the world, there are 222 million children and adolescents affected by the horrors of conflict, climate change, displacement, and other crises, and they're desperate to learn. Education Cannot Wait, or ECW, the UN's Global Fund for Education in Emergencies and Protracted Crises, was established just for them, to support education for those children. And this conference is the start of our journey to raise at least $1.5 billion to deliver ECW's 4-year strategic plan, a crucial and critical juncture in fulfilling our collective promise of education for all and providing every child, everywhere, including those in emergencies and also protracted situations and crises, with the safety, with the hope, and also the opportunity that only a quality education can provide. I used to think also it's not only the humane and the right thing to do to give those children hope. It's in the strategic interests of all of us. You know, why not give the children the tools to become the agents of change for their war-torn countries back home or in their new adopted communities? So thank you for joining ECW and its strategic global partners today as we build on the fund's groundbreaking work. And I am proud to say that it has already reached over 7 million children across more than 40 countries worldwide. So together, let's make 222 million children's dreams come true. This conference is hosted by ECW and Switzerland, and it is co-convened with Colombia, Germany, Niger, Norway, and South Sudan. I see here today world leaders, strategic donor partners, heads of UN agencies, civil society partners, very especially global youth advocates, implementing partners, and also teachers from around the world. This is your conference, and this is your chance to stand up for the world's most vulnerable children. So I'm pleased now to introduce the first of our co-hosts to say a few words, His Excellency, Mr. Ignazio Cassis, the Federal Councillor and head of the Federal Department of Foreign Affairs of Switzerland, followed by, and this will be followed by a video message by the UN Secretary General, António Guterres.
Honorable UN Special Envoy for Education, dear Gordon, distinguished ministers, high representatives of governments, local authorities, multilateral organizations, the private sector and civil society, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Geneva. Welcome to the Global Humanitarian Capital and Center for Education in Emergencies. And thank you for joining us here and online. Switzerland is proud to co-host the first ECW high-level funding conference together with Colombia, Germany, Niger, Norway, and South Sudan. Ladies and gentlemen, Switzerland, as you know, is a prosperous country. This was not always the case. In the 19th century, our country was a land of immigration. Citizens would leave my canton, the canton of Ticino, to try their luck in the new world. What is Switzerland's magic formula? You may be wondering. I can tell you without any hesitation, it is education. Switzerland is what it is today thanks to the central role given to education in government policies since the emergence of modern Switzerland 175 years ago. And sometimes it is a single person who makes a difference, like Stefano Francini. Francini was one of 7 members of the first government of the Swiss federal state back in 1848. Stefano Francini, a liberal, is considered to be the founding father of the state school system in the Italian-speaking part of Switzerland. Later on, as a federal councillor, he was the founding father of the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich, better known as ETH Zurich. Francini had a belief. He was convinced that investment in education ensures freedom. The freedom to learn fosters the potential of every child. He was a visionary. He knew that this investment would lay the foundations for Swiss progress and prosperity. Thanks to his vision, this Thursday, some 900,000 girls and boys across Switzerland went to school in safety as part of their compulsory education. On this same Thursday, 222 million children affected by crises around the world were not so lucky. This figure has even tripled in the last 5 years. The first ECW high-level financing conference is a unique opportunity for us to stand up for the right of every child on the planet to go to school in a safe learning environment. Switzerland therefore appeals to the world leaders to put education at the top of their agenda, especially the most vulnerable children in emergencies. Today, Geneva has become a global hub for education in emergencies, bringing together many actors to take joint action, work more closely, and strengthen their commitment. So here and now, I call on you, governments, foundations, the private sectors, philanthropists, and civil society to join forces and pledge our support to Education Cannot Wait. Dear friends, there can be no democracy without education. We need to be able to count on well-educated future generations. Every single human being must have the chance to receive an education. The peace, freedom, and prosperity of all nations depend on it. Thank you for your attention.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this financing conference represents a promise to the girls and boys of the world. No matter who you are, no matter where you live, no matter what barriers stand in the way, you have the right to a quality education. Today, 222 million girls and boys are directly affected by conflicts, displacement, and climate disasters. Tens of millions contend with sporadic or poor quality education. Over 78 million don't go to school at all. Education cannot wait. The United Nations Global Fund for Education in Emergencies is a lifeline for these young learners. Every year, the fund breaks new ground to deliver quality education to the world's most vulnerable children. Thanks to global partners and donors, we have reached nearly 7 million children so far. But the needs continue to multiply. Last year's Transforming Education Summit gathered the world together to forge new solutions to reach every child with the education they deserve, including children living through the chaos of humanitarian emergencies. The summit reminded us that education is the best investment we can make in a more peaceful and sustainable future. With your generous new commitments, we can deliver education to an additional 20 million children and transform the darkest humanitarian nightmares into bright new hope for the future. Let's keep our promise to the girls and boys of the world. Let's keep their dreams alive.
Indeed, education is a lifeline and an investment in our humanity. Thank you, Secretary General, and most especially thank you, Mr. Cassis, for your opening remarks. I would like to hand over right now to the Right Honourable Gordon Brown, who is the United Nations Special Envoy for Global Education, to hear his opening speech.
Let me, first of all, thank Melissa, thank Minister Cassis for his eloquence, and thank the Secretary-General, who's been one of the great supporters of Education Cannot Wait and is one of the most compassionate and caring people you can meet. But I want, first of all, to ask you, in solidarity with the thousands of people who are displaced and bereaved in Turkey and Syria, to stand up in solidarity for their suffering, in solidarity with their trials and tribulations, and to say that we will do everything in our power to ensure that people live and the people who live are properly fed, sheltered, and get education as children. Let us pledge today that we will not only provide food, shelter, and healthcare, but when we can restart education, we will make sure that every single child who is displaced has the chance of a decent education. Thank you very much. And as you know, the children of Syria and Turkey today are in addition to the 222 million children around the world in every single continent who are displaced, 78 million who will not go to school today or any other day, 140 million whose education has been so disrupted and traumatized that they are not able to read and write by the age of 11. And we are speaking up today, I tell you, for the most neglected, the most forgotten, the most isolated children in the world, and they need, deserve, and must have our support today. And we are speaking up also for girls who are the most likely to be displaced and out of education. And it is our duty to make sure that they are not trafficked or forced into child labor or forced into early marriage. And we are standing up for every girl of the world when we make our announcements of allocations of money today. I want also to speak up immediately for the girls of Afghanistan who need our support, many of whom are facing arrest and torture simply for demonstrating in favor of the right of education, many in underground schools, many now exiled into Pakistan. And we know that you cannot forever oppress girls who know what it is like to have an education. And what Education Cannot Wait will try to do over these next few months is give whatever support we can so that girls are rightfully in their right place, back at school, and not forced into early marriage or child labor. And I want us also to speak up for the girls and boys of Ukraine. We have seen schools destroyed, but the courage of the children of Ukraine is indestructible. And right round the world, from the floods of Pakistan to the droughts that we're seeing in the Horn of Africa, from the suffering of people from Myanmar in Bangladesh as refugees, to the refugees and displaced people in many countries, Chad, Somalia, South Sudan, right DRC, right across Africa. This is what Education Cannot Wait was created for, to give every single child, where we can help them, the chance of the education that they desperately need to build for the future. And we want today to say to those countries and those philanthropic foundations who are giving support to us that the money that they give today will be used to ensure the continuity of education, online education, safe schools, double shift schools, everything that we can innovate to make sure that nobody is denied education when we can possibly give it to them. And I want you to thank today Yasmine Sherif, the director, and all the staff of Education Cannot Wait for all they have done to make possible the education of millions of children. You know, friends, and we've seen it around the world, hope dies when a convoy carrying refugees gets lost at sea. Hope dies when food trying to get to refugees in besieged cities doesn't get through. But hope also dies when a young person cannot plan or prepare for the future because they don't have the chance to go to school. And the most sad thing I've seen in the last few years as UN Global Envoy for Education was in Moria in Greece, a refugee camp, where the workers there found 3 teenage boys, 11, 12, and 13, denied education, denied mentoring, denied sanitation, denied help, behind barbed wire, who felt so desolate that they were contemplating jointly committing suicide. But hope comes alive when we can offer children education, when we can offer them a chance of a better future, when even in the most desolate and the desperate places in the world, we can somehow make it possible for them to go to school or to be online in education. And let us send this message, therefore, to the whole of the international community. This is not simply about education. This is not just simply about what we do. This is about who we are and our obligations and duties to other people. You cannot succeed in delivering the Sustainable Development Goals unless you can deliver education to refugee and displaced children. You cannot have universal education for all unless we have education for refugee and displaced young girls and boys. And instead of developing only some of the potential of some of the children in some of the countries, what we are here today to say is we are going to develop all of the potential of all of the children in all countries. And we are going to be the first generation in history, with your efforts, to make sure that every single child in the world has an education. And it starts here today. Thank you very much.
Well, if that doesn't inspire us, thank you so much, Right Honourable Gordon Brown. I'm now pleased to introduce the second part of our opening session, which is a youth-led panel session with the high-level Financing Conference co-conveners. May I welcome our panelists. Let me start with Her Excellency Ms. Svenja Schulze, who is the Federal Minister for Economic Cooperation and Development of Germany. Nice to see you. His Excellency, Mr. Ibrahim Natatu, Minister of Education of Niger. Her Excellency, Ms. Anna Beate Tvinnerheim, Minister of International Development of Norway. Her Excellency, Ms. Awut Deng Akul, Minister of General Education and Instruction of South Sudan. And last but not least, His Excellency, Mr. Hernando Bayana, Deputy Minister of Pre-Primary, Primary, and Secondary Education of Colombia. And we have youth advocates who will be engaging with them with questions developed by the child and youth groups attending the conference. Oleksi from the National Foundation of Romania, partner of the Norwegian Refugee Council. Hawa from Transform Education, hosted by the United Nations Girls Education Initiative. And Jafar, a youth representative from the Iraqi Alliance of Disability Organization. So, Oleksi, would you like to introduce yourself and the panel?
Yes,
and kick off the panel, please.
Good morning, dear audience and ministers. My name is Alexei, and I'm from Ukraine. I had to flee the war because I have type 1 diabetes and was no longer able to find insulin in Ukraine. Now I'm living in Romania and working at the youth center to support many other Ukrainians who also fled the war. What I've learned from this war, that is we need support with the basic household needs, but during this time we also need cultural and educational support to maintain our dignity. So my first question is going to Federal Minister for Economic Cooperation and Development of Germany. The Global Compact on Refugees, adopted in 2018, included a commitment to allow refugee children to access education in host communities. However, in many contexts, barriers still exist. What is your ministry doing to support the implementation of the Global Compact of Refugees?
Thank you, Alexis. Thank you very much. And in the beginning, I would like to say thank you to you and all the youth delegates. It is really a pleasure to have you here. It is just talking about youth with youth, and that is what is needed. And thank you for all your engagement and for the engagement of the other youth delegates. What we are doing about refugees, you mentioned it before, it is a human right to go to school. It is a human right to have education. But we see a lot of children do not get that right, and they are not able to get education. And it is important that we deliver quality education and that we deliver it for all the young people, also young refugees. And so my ministry's initiative is to displaced persons in host countries. We are giving displaced children access to education and helping host communities to deal with this challenge. For us, it is really important to say, without loss of quality education for children. For example, we provide money for salaries, for additional teachers, and we support distance learning, psychosocial support, and inclusive classes. And this has already benefited more than 2.1 million children, 2.1 million young people, and I think that is the first step. But what I want to say here is no government can take this challenge alone. We need multilateralism. We need to work together, and we means the host countries and the countries of origin. And so it is really, really important that we have education cannot wait, that we have UNHCR, UNESCO, UNICEF, and let us work together on this challenge. Together we will manage it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I would also like, I believe Alexei has another question, right?
Yeah, I have a second question. It's going to Minister of Education of Niger. Timely and decent payments of teachers have been one reason for poor quality of education. What's your ministry's efforts to ensure teachers' payments are improved in the next 2 years?
Merci beaucoup. Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, ministers and excellencies. Before answering Alexei's question, this young Ukrainian and the one regarding the access to education as a fundamental right, let me please quote one of my colleagues. I will make education a field that I will deal with personally, just like the field of security, as it is a fundamental right and priority. In the context of Sahel and that of my country that is marked by high insecurity, and due to the actions of non-armed groups and terrorists, this declaration is very political and key. And this has been implemented through the increase of the budget for education in the state. And this is part of the state policy and has been implemented through concrete actions in order to contribute to development of human capital. In order to value teachers and their work, the government has implemented technical mechanism in order to support teachers. That's why there is a program in order to support the 70,473 teachers in Niger, in order to integrate them into as civil servants. And this program will take place between 2023 and 2026 and will cost over $40 million. 40 million CFA. And this will help us revalue the salary of the teachers and, of course, give them great perspectives for their work and career. The cost of this integration is estimated at over 21 billion CFA francs. A huge budget in order to integrate teachers as civil servants. Within this framework, which concerns the urgent management of the advantages and motivations, we have set up a particular treatment for teachers that are acting in situations and regions of crisis. This will take place over the next 2 years, and despite the world crisis, the local economy is going to increase thanks to our resources in oil. We will take advantage of these resources in order to develop our socioeconomic actions, and especially actions in education, in order to improve the life, the well-being of our population, and this through valuing the work of teachers, learning, and help invest in human capital on the whole.
Thank you very much, Minister. And I'd like to turn to Hawa and ask Hawa if you could introduce yourself and ask your question.
My name is Hawa Abdiaziz. I'm a Somali refugee who was born in Maraf refugee camp in Kenya. I'm currently based in Istanbul, Turkey, where I'm doing my bachelor's degree in media and journalism. I co-lead, she leads Kakuma in Kakuma refugee camp. I'm also a member of Transform Education hosted by Envoy. And I'm passionate about transforming education for young girls who are having many barriers to access quality education in the world. And my first question goes to the Minister of International Development of Norway. As our leader, how will you ensure that young people will be involved in decision-making process in areas that really affects them, like quality education, climate change, and gender equality? And also, how can the energy and commitment of young people help effort to improve access to education for girls?
Thank you, Hawa. It's a good question, and it's a very important question. And it really is the responsibility of us as leaders to make sure that young voices are part of our decision-making. Why is that important? First of all, because it makes our decisions a lot better. And to make it work on the ground in practice. I'd like to mention one example that made a huge impression on me. I visited a school in the Somali region in Ethiopia a few months ago, and I discussed climate change with the kids in school, and they had made a climate change club. Now, this is a region of Ethiopia which has been struck by the worst drought for 40 years. And these kids are the ones that are going to grow their food in the future in this region. So they were the best positioned to give advice on how to adapt to a changing climate. They needed the knowledge about climate change, but they also knew what would work on the ground to adapt to these challenges. So that's just one example on how we need to get those voices up to the decision makers so that we can assist them for future policies. I'm I'm excited to get voices like yours, Hawa, other youth delegates here. We saw the same at the Transforming Education Summits in the UN last year. And there were some really outspoken young people that really put the cupboard where it's supposed to be, telling us how they need to see their voices heard. That's great. It's our role as politicians to make sure that that arena is created, but it's not enough because we also need to actually listen and transform that into action. But that being said, point one, it's instrumentally important to include the young voices as we design our politics and policies. That's the instrumental part. But we must never lose sight of the fact that education is a human right. It's right there in the Declaration of Human Rights, Article 26, right to education. So, and that is why I am here, because the right to education is a right, is a human right, no matter where you live, no matter whether you are in a crisis, if you are in a refugee camp, it is your human right. And Education Cannot Wait is doing a fantastic job to move quickly as crises strike. And secondly, they endure, they stay on the ground as the crisis become protracted. And that is why Education Cannot Wait is a very important instrument to fulfill a basic human rights for young people.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Minister. And I think we keep hearing the right to education is a central message, and we need to just fulfill it. How would you like to ask one more question to one of the ministers?
My second question goes to the Ministry of General Education and Instruction of South Sudan. As our leader, what is the plan of South Sudan to ensure that returnees from neighboring countries are received and given access to schools and quality education?
Thank you very much, Hawa. First of all, I wanted to thank Gordon Brown, the chair of Education Cannot Wait, and my sister Yasmine Sherif, the director of Education Cannot Wait, because with their efforts we are here to actually share the difficult time that education is going through. Countries which are in crisis, I think we have seen Turkey of late and Syria, South Sudan. We have areas, not only refugees, but areas which have no access. Areas which we called hard to reach areas. You cannot reach them unless you use helicopters to get there. So these are the children we are talking about today in South Sudan. And I think I want us to reflect on this thought. The right to education for children affected by crisis in the world is at stake, inclusive of those who will be coming back to South Sudan from refugees, from internally displaced children, from those who are affected by flood in the country. So our plan is to look at education, that education is a right for every child, that creates a sense of normalcy and gives hope to these children, build their resilience and ability to bounce back and strive. I therefore think that it is important that building more schools to accommodate 2.8 million out-of-school children in South Sudan is a priority. When refugees return, the place we have now, it is so small, teacher having 100 students in a class, so there is going to be more facilities that will be needed to accommodate the children who are coming back, such as so-called support with the trauma that children will come with. I think they need that support. So we need to create a conducive environment for these children to be back to South Sudan. So I therefore call upon governments and donors present in this hall and outside it to commit more funds to join our cause with Education Cannot Wait and funds education, especially for children in crisis-affected countries. I call for united action and work together collectively to save our children and prepare them for a better future. Time to act and invest in education in order to facilitate education of 222 million children out of school is now. There is no better time to do this than now, when education systems around the world are threatened with many problems. So let us make a dream of 222 million children a reality all over the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, for your inspiring messages from a country that has experienced so much displacement and so much education need. I'd now like to turn to our final round of questions and ask Jafar to introduce himself and to ask his question.
Good morning, everyone. I cannot hear him. My name is Jafar Al-Khafaji. I'm from Iraq. And I am a youth representative of the Iraqi Alliance of Disability Organization. I am one of the students who have suffered because of the systems of education, because our system of education needs to be improved, because we do not have secondary education for secondary education and above for those of hard of hearing. So we need to improve this in Iraq. My question is, addressed to the Minister of Education of Colombia. Despite the increased interest in inclusion, the Article 24 of the Agreement on the Rights of those with disabilities, we see that there is nothing applied in the emergency and crisis areas. What is the strategy adopted by your country in this approach, in this case?
Thank you so much for the question. It's of utmost importance. As in this event, we don't always have the possibility of communicating in our own language to interact. Many people across the world are refugees, and they suffer from an emergency, and they don't have this possibility we have today. And I'd like to highlight that today before I start. In relation to your question, it is important to share that the current situation makes us vulnerable in two ways because of the disability and the emergency situation. It is a challenge in Colombia. In our country, there are multiple emergencies taking place on a daily basis, although we acknowledge that there is still a long way to go in Colombia when making progress to materialize the right to education for all our population. Our country has adhered to the Convention on the Rights of People with Disability to expand some laws and policies in our country to benefit over 180 million students. 180,000 students in the world. We materialize different actions. We have increased the number of support teachers, and they play their role in relation to inclusion for all people with disabilities. And we are working together with on-site teachers. And we have technically supported secretariats for education for implementation of risk prevention in Colombia. We have trained teachers so they can make the right adjustments to curricula addressed to students with disabilities. We have developed resources and materials so schools can provide education in emergencies, focusing on people with disabilities. And we have submitted technical rules and regulations, so it's about different platforms that are now accessible to all people with disabilities. And this is a policy of the Ministry of National Education. We have implemented flexible education models for migrated people and displaced people. But we still think that the country is still in debt with its own population. And we believe that a project for peace is the same project for education. And this is why we need to carry on to ensure the right to education. We have identified some challenges and difficulties we're still facing. We have to ensure the inclusion of students with disabilities in virtual education processes. We have to develop material and accessible resources as well as new technologies. We have to strengthen the capabilities of teachers in teaching settings so they make education accessible to students with disabilities. We have to increase support teachers. Although we have made some progress, we still need more support teachers. We need to hire interpreters and middle people to approach disabilities. We are happy to say that the first director, the first manager of our institution is a person with hearing disabilities, and this is a key message that shows the challenges and the changes we make in our country. We also have to support local governments and schools to be able to ensure inclusion. We have to promote the involvement of the community and the intersectoral partnerships with families and support networks, and health and protection to ensure the inclusion of the students with disabilities within education. So the articulation is still a pending issue, and we are facing this challenge today. I'd like to close with that, and I'd like to say that these challenges will become more and more difficult in a country like ours, where violence, climate disasters, and migrations keep us in a constant situation of emergency. And that's why we require social mobilization for education to turn schools into the center of social and cultural transformation in our country. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Minister. Yes, it's not only in outlining all of the complexities of including not just those who are in need of education, but including all students. Thank you. And thank you to all of you, to all of our ministers, and what a great panel. Also fantastic questions from our youth advocates and co-conveners. And yes, our youth ambassadors are absolutely key to making sure that we remain accountable and transparent. So you tell us how we're doing, right? And thank you. This helped us kick off the ECW conference in the right manner, and I am now pleased, if we can all maybe exit the stage, to introduce our next keynote speaker, Ms. Catherine Russell, who is the Executive Director of UNICEF. Please share your thoughts. She's also co-convener.
Thank you so much, Excellencies, colleagues. First of all, I just want to say it's great to be in a room full of people who care so much about children. I want to thank very much Education Cannot Wait and the other co-hosts and co-conveners of the High-Level Financing Conference. I love hearing Gordon Brown. I always feel like with him at the front of this, we can't lose. I also want to thank the wonderful panelists who you just heard, the youth advocates and ministers of education for your very thoughtful discussion and your recommendations. I certainly agree that we must act urgently to protect and expand access to education for children living through emergencies. Unfortunately, much of the international community isn't quite there yet. There's widespread acceptance that when a crisis strikes, children's education stops. Last year, for example, the proportion of humanitarian funding allocated to education remained below 3%, with many donors preferring to fund life-saving interventions like healthcare and clean water. But the truth is that education is both life-saving and life-changing. When children in crisis-affected countries have access to education, they also have access to a range of services that support their well-being, like psychosocial support and social interaction, essential public safety information like mine risk awareness, and in many cases, a nutritious meal and clean water. And of course, education provides children, whether living in emergency contexts or not, with the foundational learning tools to survive and thrive as adults. Education also helps to mitigate and address the impacts of climate change. Each year, events linked to climate change disrupt learning for more than 40 million children. Yet, less than 1% of all climate financing is spent on education, despite the transformative role it can play in helping children and communities to adapt and build resilience. UNICEF is deeply committed to ensuring that children's right to education no matter what the circumstances and how challenging they are. We implement the largest education and emergency program globally, allocating about 60% of our annual education expenditures to humanitarian contexts. UNICEF works across the humanitarian development nexus, which helps to ensure that education solutions are sustainable and that systems are strengthened over the long term. In 2023, we have appealed for nearly $2 billion in funds so that we can reach about 26 million children living in emergencies with education support. This includes working with governments and communities to make education systems more resilient to climate-related disruptions, and we're aiming to reach at least 10 million children and youth each year with green skills training. UNICEF is using innovative solutions to provide access to learning across a range of humanitarian contexts. The Learning Passport is a great example of that. It can be rapidly deployed and adapted in times of crisis so that children can learn anywhere and at any time. The platform is now live in 28 countries and is reaching 3 million students so far. Excellencies, I know that all of us here agree on the vital importance of supporting children's education in emergencies. The challenge is of convincing others. This starts with working more closely with governments to turn commitments made at the Transforming Education Summit last year into concrete funding and policy action. We have to also generate additional funds to support the ECW strategic plan without diverting humanitarian funds from other critical response sectors. We need flexible multi-year funding so that we can better respond to new and emerging crises, just like we're seeing in Turkey and Syria. And we need donor support to unlock the funds necessary to build climate-smart education systems. We can do this by demonstrating the impact of our work and our capacity to scale our programming quickly, by showing donors that we will maximize every single dollar to deliver the greatest impact for children, and by aligning our efforts to eliminate inefficiencies. In other words, we're ready now to expand our reach. We just need the resources to do it. I'm encouraged to hear about the financial commitments being made today to support education in emergencies. We all have a role to play, and we all have to do our part. You can continue to count on UNICEF as a steadfast partner in our collective effort to ensure that every single child can learn and reach their full potential, no matter where they are. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Catherine Russell from UNICEF, so inspiring. And now, to close our opening session, I would like to welcome Yasmine Sherif, who is the Executive Director of Education Cannot Wait. And I'm going to ask Yasmine, because she has been at the forefront of ECW, at the forefront of ECW's incredible growth and success to date. So, you've been leading the fund from its inception until today. So, having raised over $1 billion and responding to some of the world's worst crises in the world, please give us some of your reflections on how you got here and where you're going.
Thank you very much, dear Melissa. Thank you, Melissa. So when you work with people like Melissa and so many others whose name I will mention, that's how you get there. When you work with human beings, organizations, like all of you represent, and governments, and civil society, and private sector, and the children, and the youth, and the teachers, that's how you get here. So that's my answer to your question, Melissa. Because education cannot wait is a movement. It's energy. We keep moving forward. We keep moving upward. Because there are 222 million children out there and adolescents. They want us to move. They want us to act, not just talk. So we are a movement. And we are all here today. We are gathering because education cannot wait. It's about being together. And it's very much in line in support of the UN Secretary General's reform program, the new way of working. We don't compete anymore. We don't work in silos. We are coming together. That's the power of human energy coming together. And first of all, I would like to thank the government of Switzerland and the federal minister and former federal president, Mr. Cassis, and his wonderful team at the Foreign Affairs and STC for hosting this absolutely beautiful conference, as he so rightly said, in the capital of the world and the United Nations, the humanitarian capital. And of course, our great ministers of Norway, development ministers of Norway, of Niger, of Germany, South Sudan, and Colombia, for being with us, not only in words, but in spirit, by working together through resources, through expertise, and also hosting us in your countries and be here as good co-conveners. This would not have been possible without all of you coming together. I need to give thanks to the founder of Education Cannot Wait. I know there were civil society, UN agencies. UNICEF was one of the staunchest supporters, other agencies and governments behind the foundation. But there was one leader who just drew it without any excuses or any apologies. And you saw him speaking today, and that is the UN's Special Envoy for Global Education, Honorable Gordon Brown. Thank you so much. This is your thinking, and it's turned into reality. You know, it takes a great idea and a great mind, and then the rest of us make it happen. I would also like to thank our very gracious host, and Executive Director of UNICEF, Catherine Russell. UNICEF is hosting Education Cannot Wait and is absolutely gracious, allowing us flexibility to move with this speed, but also to stay firm to our accountability and the depth and the quality. And we don't want to leave you, UNICEF. So thank you very much to Executive Director Catherine Russell. And I will conclude here, but we are here to implement our second strategic plan, the coming 4 years, and to be able to kickstart that with our financing conference here today. And I will not say too much about that at this stage, come back to that later, and I will stop here. But let me say this in conclusion. In conclusion, we think about all the 222 million children out there, and now the number keeps growing with Syria, with Turkey, and in Ukraine and elsewhere. never ever to forget them, and never ever to see them as just another task on our desk or another day in the office. Because all of us are here, the 2,000 online, the 500 in the room, we are here not because it's our duty for today or our file for today. We are all here gathered because of the strength of our indomitable human spirit to make 222 million dreams come true. It comes from our human spirit, and so we shall continue. Thank you very much.